Hi everyone, and welcome to Conversations powered by KPMG Luxembourg. Today, we are continuing off the back of our 2-episode series on digital assets, and we've invited another exceptional guest, Mr. Maxime Baron. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
In our last 2 episodes on digital assets, we focused mostly on cryptocurrency adoption, tokenization, and little bits of Web3 here and there. However, in this episode, we're going to focus more on Web3 technology, its influence here in Luxembourg, and the effects it could have in the financial sector. So I think before we get started, maybe Maxime, you can tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for this intro. Thanks for having me again. So my name is Maxime. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Hash Consulting based in Luxembourg. We've been here for about 5 years, but I joined the crypto sector in 2018. Started working in tokenization, precious metals specifically gold, silver, and palladium at the time, for a French group called aucoffre.com. It's basically one of the biggest, if not the biggest in France, and they had a willingness to, modernize gold buying. So the goal was to work with gold, how to tokenize it, how to make it efficient. That was before Tether Gold. It was right at the moment of Pax Gold, approximately. And while doing the marketing strategy for this company, that's how I met my co-founder, Owen Simona, who's an entrepreneur from not far from here in France. And that's how we got started, basically.
Yeah, so I guess you've been in the industry for some time. So you've seen, if we're going to go back to Web3, you've sort of seen it being a futuristic concept rather than implementation. Yeah. And now, it's in multi-million-dollar markets. There's protocols. Governments are scrambling to put regulation in place. So where would you say Luxembourg would stand in regards to their implementation of Web3 technology here?
Just to contextualize first, it definitely started as kind of something out there, back in 2017, 2018. And by the way, I'm not claiming I'm any of the OGs, which I consider to be prior to 2013, 2014. But even back then in 2017, it was still, whenever a headline popped up, price would react very heavily, which is not the case anymore, which shows that the market has matured a lot, and that it's more an actual financial market right now, more than it was. So it definitely evolved a lot. It's funny to see because there's the way we picture it now is going to be very different next year. It's going to be very different even 6 months from now. It changes constantly all the time. Now, to answer your question about Luxembourg's place, I really started before Luxembourg, really with a French oversight on everything. Not oversight, but way to see things. And I would say the difference is that in France, we've had a very prominent legal-focused approach. MiCA was really inspired by what the French did, basically. Luxembourg definitely joined the pack maybe a little later, but is definitely going in the right direction. We've seen what Six Monks has done, being one of the first legally approved entities to operate funds in Luxembourg. And I think this specifically really sparked a lot of interest towards the country. And there are a lot of opportunities in anything blockchain, should it be from a technical perspective or from a pure financial instrument perspective, because yield is approached very differently on chain. And there's a lot of different sources that did not exist before, just because the infrastructure for it to be provided did not exist. And now it does. So there's definitely some things to do here.
And in terms of mainstream adoption, because I think a lot of people who are curious about Web3 technology and what it has to offer, there may seem to be a roadblock because maybe they just don't understand the technical details, or they think it's too complicated and things like this. So maybe if you can give a simplified definition of Web3 for those who are curious but are still hesitant to actually get absorbed within it.
There's 2 ways to approach this. Either you define Web3 itself, or you define the basis behind what made Web3 possible. And I'll start with the latter, because Web3 again is a marketing term, and if you want to define it in the simplest terms, blockchain is a decentralized database.
Right.
That's it. It's just decentralized, and instead of having one server somewhere that achieves consensus on its own, and that represents a lot of security problems, you have servers absolutely everywhere. Not for all blockchains, of course, but theoretically absolutely everywhere that communicate between each other and make sure that consensus is achieved, even though all of the actors that are validating the data are not geographically at the same place. So the ownership factor is what makes Web3 Web3, and the ownership factor is possible because of smart contracts, and smart contracts run on blockchains.
Right. Yeah.
That's it. You don't need to be more complex about it. Smart contracts, we could talk about it for hours, but it's just basically automatized functions.
Sure.
That's it. Mostly financial, but it doesn't have to be.
Like, I guess one of the criticisms I've heard when comparing Web3 to Web2 is that Web3 is not as user-friendly, let's say, compared to Web2. And so, I mean, do you think this is this is an important obstacle that has to be addressed or overcome?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But again, it's a time issue.
Sure.
If you try to use Google Excel in 1997, it was super difficult.
Right, yeah, forget about it.
Comparatively speaking to Google Sheets today, right? So it's the exact same thing. It was Changpeng Zhao, the CEO of Binance, who said, I think, 2022, I think, or 2021, something that I really kept is or let's say back in 2022, he said we are at the floppy disk phase, talking about blockchain.
Sure.
And I think it really just shows that we have a long way to go. And, technically, from a UX perspective, definitely there's a lot of things to improve. I mean, no one really wants to go through the hassle of interacting with MetaMask in order to interact with the blockchain. But now you have whole companies and whole industries being built around account abstraction, around, just chain abstraction even, where the user just interacts with an interface that he's been familiar with for his whole life, and blockchain is behind it, but he doesn't need to see it.
Exactly.
Just like you don't see the TCP/IP protocol interacting, nor do you need to understand it in order to use the internet.
Sure.
Exact same thing. So I think we just need about maybe 10, 15 years for people to really understand that blockchain is just a type of technology. And going back to your previous question about culture, having those roadblocks, I think today there's two problems. First, the technical aspect of things, and two, the use of blockchain. Why? Because unfortunately, most of what makes the headlines, I'm not saying this is what is done the most, but what makes the most headlines is hacks or Trump meme coins or stuff like that. So of course it paints a picture of the industry which is not the best or has not been the best. But it will change inevitably just because people will realize it's just a tool. It does not have to be hyper speculative in order to use it.
So you don't think that because it seems as though these sorts of the media and reports about hacks or when people have rug pulls when it comes to cryptocurrency, that, I mean, these will still be happening, no?
Yeah.
Or, but you think just with the maturity of the market and about how much more people will learn about it, then these sorts of stories will kind of be more on the back burner, and then mainstream adoption is more probable over time, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's, hacks still happen on centralized database. And when there are hacks today, it's not a problem of the infrastructure itself. Usually, it's a problem of a centralized point within, or that is acting on a decentralized database. So again, yes, internet is what it is today because there's been a lot of mistakes that have been done by literally millions of people.
Sure. Yeah.
And blockchain, we're still maybe a few 100,000 people in that actually created technical stuff. So yeah, it will just keep evolving. We're going to keep making mistakes until we make less.
Right.
Just like pretty much everything with humans, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, this is not the only
technology.
time that this has happened.
Absolutely.
With anything. So yeah. And I want to go back because you did mention the centralized aspect, and one of the key parts with Web3 is the decentralized nature.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we're always hearing, whether it's from financial institutions or government organizations, that there seems to be hesitance with having regulation because in one way it will create this legitimate space for people to use this technology. However, there's also the possibility that the sort of innovative or creative aspect of what makes Web3 and blockchain so attractive and such a great opportunity, it would sort of diminish that by having more regulation. So I just want to know your opinion on this.
Speaking of regulation, it's always going to be a spectrum, right? It's either you enforce too much and you kill innovation, or you enforce too little and you let just too much stuff happen.
Exactly.
So you need regulation. It's not even a question. There needs to be regulation. The question is, how do you make it regulated, right? And I think it's, again, the same for every single industry, but specifically for crypto, it makes sense because it's very, very financial.
Sure.
And on internet back in the day, you definitely had this financial aspect at some point, but not at the same level of maturity as the level of maturity that crypto is right now. Crypto from day one was financial, which means that you carry a lot of risk because it's super innovative, and because it's super early, right? But you carry a lot of risk within an ecosystem that has been financial from day one. So it's extremely dangerous for most people, and you need regulation. But the sweet spot is letting people do what they want to do within a frame that makes sense. And the trick is letting people make regulations if those people actually know how the industry functions. We had an example in France a few years back where regulation tried to basically tell all the companies that were not regulated as a digital asset service provider that they needed to be in order to communicate. But it didn't make much sense because you have a lot of companies that don't need to be digital asset service provider.
Right, yeah.
And those types of companies would not have been able to communicate because they were not registered as digital asset service provider, therefore, would not have been able to communicate. So the whole discussion about this was, okay, then how do we find the sweet spot? You have companies that need to be, right? Financial providers, custodians, those guys need to be regulated. If they are regulated, very good. They can therefore communicate. If they're not, they can't. Simple. But for other companies that don't need to be, maybe we need to have a bit more leeway. And this is the extra step. That is the sweet spot. And again, it's very peculiar to every single country, every single frame.
And I think one of the, it's interesting, I mean, you mentioning how every country, whether it's Luxembourg, and here in Europe, and we see in Switzerland, they have their crypto valley.
Yep.
In Germany, I know that they've done, I think it's the Electronic Securities Act to help make it more accessible and popular. And even in Portugal, they are having, I think the government is helping fund tokenization projects or startups, funding pretty heavily. And so this I'm trying to tie in with the US because, I mean, we've seen a lot of changes happening over the course of the last few months. We do know that the current administration seems pretty open to digital assets and trying to create a sort of, let's say, popular regulation for more of it to happen there. So I just want to know your aspect on what you think would happen or will happen.
I think saying they're open to it is it's maybe even lowballing it, to be honest,
Sure.
because it's not just being open, it's letting everything happen.
Yes,
it might be a little too much, to be honest. So coming back to the sweet spot aspect, you had this and now you have that, and where you have the actual president of the United States of America launching a meme coin. This is pure extractable value.
Right, yeah.
Let's let's make things better. Let's think about it at least. Not even going to talk about the derivatives of it because it's even worse. But yeah, again, it's better to let people build what they want to build. But again, you need at least a bit of you need a bit of rules because otherwise people do absolutely everything. And there's something in crypto culture that is very popular these days because of what's happening in the US is we're calling what's happening now crime season, just because it feels that crime is legal and it should not be, right? It makes absolutely no sense though.
And I think it makes it even more difficult when we see what's happening in Argentina as well with their president's coin as well, because this has seemed to be a contentious point with them.
Please just let's try to do things properly and not just try to extract value, because it's what's been happening a lot recently, which is, it is not helping with the current view of most people about our ecosystem.
Sure.
And I think it's not going to change by just saying it will change. We have to also actively participate in this creation of value, and it's been a central element to what we've been doing at Hash Consulting for a while. We can activate a lot of channels. We can do a lot of publicity when necessary, but we also have a need to remain extremely vigilant as to who we work with.
Sure.
Just because there are still a lot of actors that are malevolent, let's say, in the industry. So we have to detect that before letting it free, on the European markets.
And I think it seems as though in Europe there is, compared to the rest of the world, in Europe there seems to be more of a governance / regulatory focus to not allow these sorts of things of happening, which is kind of great for Luxembourg, because there are enough resources here. It is a very business-friendly / digital asset-friendly environment for these sorts of companies to grow and become a central part here in Europe. So, I guess, would you agree that in Europe it may be the best area for this sort of adoption to take place, because there is more, I don't want to say restriction, but more regulation to allow these companies to be able to provide this sort of technology in the ways that they do without having these malicious actors in place?
Yeah, I agree with this. And there's, again, two things to say here: Europe's place, Luxembourg's place. As for Europe's place, I agree, but again, my opinion does not really matter here. You can look at all of the exchanges, all of the big companies that have set foot in Europe. Europe is definitely one great place to build, because you know what you can and cannot do. If you do that in, overseas, across the pond, as they say, you don't really know what you can and cannot do, because it might not be true anymore.
And so because you were mentioning about marketing and sort of, I guess, the attractiveness of Luxembourg, and I know earlier we were saying how maybe it's still, maybe not behind, but that other countries are a bit more advanced for a plethora of factors. So in your opinion, how do you think Luxembourg can become a country that will be more attractive to kind of get it up to the same pace as Switzerland, Germany, France?
Everything starts with education. It does not need to be everyone, right? But educate the right people, educate the right actors. Because I would assume that when you understand that it's a tool that makes things very easier, or a lot easier for a lot of actors, should it be companies, should it be corporates, should it be just retail participants, it makes things so much easier. There is definitely a technical step, right? It needs a little bit of work there, but it's so much better inside of companies for anything tracking, right? Anything remittances, anything supply chain, anything logistics. It just makes sense. But again, it's a tool. And I'm not saying it's 100 times better than what you have today, because as a tool, humans are going to input data, and then the tool is going to manage it, and data is going to be, is going to leave. So if the data itself that is put within it is incorrect, the result is going to be incorrect as well. But the tool itself still makes things a lot easier and a lot more secure for most companies that are going to try to use it. Again, for anything specifically logistics, anything specifically tokenization, it just makes so much sense. And it was my personal conviction starting in the space in precious metals tokenization, because it's so much easier. Think about all of the health applications that this could have.
That can come from,
just for following through with actual data, so that you don't lose data anymore about patients, that you don't lose any more data about history of a patient or history of whatever. It just makes everything perfectly traceable.
Right. Yeah.
which is the best aspect of it, to my opinion.
Because I mean, I think this is one of the key things here is that when you were speaking about your previous company and, all of the actual benefits that can come from this technology, from something that's more, I would say, real world, like health benefits, it seems as though these are the types of sectors that have blockchain that mainstream people do not know anything about. They might think it's strictly in finance or strictly from just a tech point of view. But once there is this sort of like actual, tangible use cases, this sort of education on the topic and all of the potential is where I think we have the possibility to really break through with blockchain technology on a wider scale as opposed to what it's been so far. So,
Agreed.
And I think lastly, we can just go more back to, because I did want to ask about MiCA. You had brought it up a bit earlier. And okay, you might have already answered it. I wanted to know if you think that this specific regulation would hinder any development of blockchain here in terms of attracting more companies, or do you think that this should be, or that this is going to help attract more players?
I think it's going to hinder innovation a little, right? Just because there's a cost to everything.
Right.
And being MiCA compliant requires tens of people and hundreds of thousands of dollars for a company, and it's not an easy fit for a startup to spend that. So there's definitely going to be a natural selection that needs to be,
Of course.
that will happen, sorry. But on the other hand, it also makes things easier for already established corporations to start diving into this stuff. Because yes, of course, everything has consequences, right? So if you put a bit of regulation, newcomers and very early startups are going to have a bit more difficulty, right?
Right, yeah.
Makes sense. But at the same time, you're going to have bigger players that are going to be able to use it more efficiently. So I guess it really depends on how you define adoption. Is it the number of people building independently? Or is it the volume of financial transactions that happens on chain that is adoption? Depends, to each his own. But to my knowledge, MiCA really helps in, again, setting what you can and cannot do. And it's so much easier just to live when you know what you can and cannot do. So I think it's a good thing overall. And it will bring more attention to it, definitely.
And would you say that this, that MiCA and similar regulations, do you think that this may help Luxembourg advance at the same pace as, let's say, in the US, in Asia, or is it still a bit creating more limitations?
It will definitely make Europe a little slower, I believe. But again, slower in the short term might be faster in the longer term, because having a very, very fast-paced environment is very good for innovation. But again, if it is innovation just for the sake of innovation for financial whatevers that's happening overseas, doesn't make much sense. I think, again, coming back to the sweet spot, this is where you need to figure out what it is depending on what type of population you're talking to, what type of builders you're talking to. But I think it also it's difficult to start a company, right? It's very difficult to find people, find the money. To just starting it is very difficult. And I think where states and governments really have a play is, again, educate. It can be accelerators. It can be incubators. It can be bigger players like KPMG actually educating clients, educating people internally on how things work, because it does not need to be all the time top to bottom. It could be bottom to up as well. If you have a lot of people that knowingly act on what they do because they've been educated about something, then it makes it easier for corporations or bigger overarching structures to open their ears, basically. So I think something that is extremely important, and we've been working with a lot of accelerators and incubators over the years just to educate them on marketing, educate them on how to do things, and seeing all of those people believing in what they build is really the best thing, because they're convinced that what they're doing is the best option. It might not be true, right? There could be things that can be improved all the time, but letting people build things they want to build is the best thing. Again, should they be able to build absolutely everything and anything? No. No, because otherwise you end up with some stuff that is not really commendable. So again, should it come from a government entity or a private corporation, just focus on education. Because again, when people understand, they're just going to be able to do more.
Mm-hmm. And you would say your clients, they're pretty well educated as well, but you can also provide them with any other information too.
Absolutely, yeah. Having been in the space for a while, we've been used to vulgarizing stuff, so making it easier. And our job at the very core is to understand, simplify, and broadcast. That's all we've been doing for the past 5 years. Understanding very complex pieces of technology, making it simple for anybody to understand, or depending on the audience, we can customize that, and then finding the right channels to talk to the right audience and make them understand what we understood at first.
Okay, great. I think one last question I want to ask you is in terms of, so with Web3, do you think that there is something that will happen in the next 5 or 10 years, like some sort of new aspect of the technology that can help elevate, like what will we see in 5 to 10 with Web3, I'm saying?
There's a big topic around the crossroads between blockchain and artificial intelligence. It's nothing new, right? But we haven't really found the way to make it work yet. The thing is, when you combine LLMs with financial transactions, it can get very weird very quickly if you don't give it rules, right? But you could also imagine that if you as a person authorize a digital entity to manage your finances, it would be possible to create this, just an automated financial manager.
Sure.
And I think blockchain is very useful for anything AI for 2 reasons. One, it's going to be enabling AI to interact with anything financial, but also blockchain can use as a verification tool because of what AI is creating. Because one of the downsides of AI is you are able to copy and paste absolutely everything while adding something that makes it different. And you create so many things so quickly that it makes it super difficult to authenticate what's real and what's not. And that's where blockchain could come in. So there's really 2 levels to this, enabling financial things for AI tools or financial interactions for AI tools, but also blockchain as a truth machine, to take the words of a friend of mine. And that's why I'm so bullish on blockchain, because everybody's very bullish on AI as they should. Right. I am too, but I think blockchain really is concomitant to this, right? So if one works, the other one is going to be necessary, and both
together.
It really is a game changer.
Yeah, 'cause it seems as though that with AI, one of the main criticisms and issues is this sort of real versus fake, or whether something is So, and with blockchain, I mean, this is one of the key aspects, is that it can provide this truth, this verification, this transparency of what it actually is. So, I mean, it seems as though there's a good amount of potential in the next, let's say, few years even.
And again, blockchain was born in 2008, pretty much. It was not born in 2008. The first working iteration of blockchain works in 2008. So it's been in the work for 40 years approximately. The first works, Hybrid, Sternetta, stuff like that. That was 1990s, 1980s, maybe 70s, late 70s even. But for the first working iteration of blockchain is 2008, 2009, right? It's been very recent, right? It's still super recent. The market is what, 3 trillions? That's nothing. Yeah. So there's a lot of room to grow. And when you add that to the potency that it has with AI, it just makes so much sense to keep developing on it. I just think it's going to be an absolutely huge industry in 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years. It's just it's never going to stop. It's going to be one tool that's so exceptional for pretty much anything digital.
Sure. All right. Thank you very much, Maxime, for joining us today, and it was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you have any questions on digital assets, KPMG is here to assist you. We have a global network of experts who can provide you with the resources and services to guide you on your digital assets journey. For more information, please visit our website at kpmg.lu. Thank you.